So this is our very first Yield webinar. This is a pilot slash test run. We're going to be talking about publishing and the different options that you can have for publishing. This actually came up because of something that I saw on FLAC Photo Network. There was a discussion on, why create photo books, why publish photo books, should you consider the quality or the expense of photo books when you're making them? And so what we'll start doing is we'll make introductions. So I'm Mike Rippey. I run Yield Magazine. I also work for the Snipe Museum. I'm the digital archivist and multimedia producer. And I've been here for 5 years. I've been working at museums for almost 20 years. And then I'll hand this off to Rachel Banks, and she can introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Rachel Banks. I am an assistant professor of photography at Northern Kentucky University, and I am currently based in Covington, Kentucky.
Nathan, if you want to go next.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Pierce. I'm an artist and photographer, make zines and photo books. I also, publish a little bit of material, some zines, including the work of other photographers, emerging photographers, all that. Also a collector of zines and photo books. Yeah.
David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm David Acton. I'm curator of photography at the Snipe Art Museum at Notre Dame. I've been a curator for longer than all the rest of you have been alive. So this is old stuff to me, and I'm a very traditional curator. So I have been aware of and working with photo books for decades.
Walker, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Walker Pickering. I'm an assistant professor of art at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And I guess I'm in the process of finding a publisher for a body of work I've worked on for, 8 years or so. And a bunch of different publishers over the last year especially to have discussions about that. So that's where I'm at. And I also teach a photo bookmaking class here at the University of Nebraska every 3 years or so. So where we actually deal with the structure of books, and we're hand binding hardbound books.
And finally, Amanda.
I am Amanda Chestnut. I am the communications coordinator here at the Flower City Art Center in Rochester, New York. I have my MFA from Visual Studies Workshop here also in Rochester. I have a background in photography and in arts management, and I also happen to make photo books myself.
Great. Thank you all for the introductions. So what I wanted to do is there's an outline on the right-hand side of in the chat window. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of the books that I have here just as examples. And Nathan's going to be completely familiar with them because he donated all of them. Some of you, some of these are a little more well-known, so you'll probably see them. But it's running the gamut. So I'm just going to hold some of these up. And Nathan, if you can talk a little bit about why you initially acquired them, and then we can maybe if everybody can talk a little bit about if there's something similar that they have in their collection, maybe, or just generally we'll just talk about them. But here's the first one.
Yeah.
So what was the draw to this? So it's the way it's printed. It looks like it's on copy paper.
Yeah.
Something you get off a Xerox machine, and it's let me get this out of here. And it's just it's just copies basically.
Right.
And then it's just stapled together. So it's about 4 by 7, I think, in the format.
Yeah.
So tell us about the book. Tell us about the photographer, and tell us what really drew you to decide to get this. Or maybe maybe they gave it to you. I'm not sure. So
I purchased that one.
Okay.
So yeah, it was interesting to me because I'd grown up looking at zines, not necessarily with photography, but other types of fanzines, related to punk rock music and whatever. So when I, as a photographer, as I got into it and discovered that people were doing the same thing, essentially, creating DIY zines and selling them for just a few dollars. I mean, that one maybe cost me $4 or $5. Yeah, came from the West Coast. That's one in a long series of just street photos they'd made. Yeah, I was definitely interested in it because it had the DIY ethic that I remembered from zines that I read when I was 15, but it was photographs. So I love that you could still make stuff like that and distribute it cheaply. Everyone could afford it, or most people could give up $4 or $5 for a zine. So yeah, that's what attracted me to that one.
Cool. So there's some other ones here, and maybe we might go through them a little more quickly, but this is one. This is one of Nathan's books.
Yeah.
It's a short book. Let me see, I can spotlight myself, so.
Yeah.
So we'll just run through a couple of them. I just want to get you see what they look like on the inside. Let's see. Here's another interesting one. It's larger. Let's see. It's a short edition run, handmade.
Yeah. What is that one, Ian Lewandowski?
You see.
Sorry,
Yeah, I was actually going to write all these down before I started doing this, but.
yeah. I'm
Yeah.
fairly positive that that's where it came from.
Yep.
And I got, a great stack of zines and books from Ian through a trade. So yeah, I love that part of zine making as well. The people just want to get them in your hands and will trade you for whatever you've made. And yeah, Ian makes fantastic work. Always really quality stuff. So
here's another book, Mommy Cooks Dinner by Gwen Johnson. It has the kind of gated, that's the back, obviously. This is once we do a few of these videos, I'm going to have an assistant, and we're going to have some, like a copy stand to look at these books a little better.
sure.
This is all somewhat on the fly, but and then we have different kinds of packaging that things come in. So we have something that comes in a box, and there's multiple photographers here. And what's inside are the smaller books. Trying to get my camera to look better. Here's one. Get that to come in. This has a lot of text with the images. Let's see. We have this format, which comes in a plastic case. It looks like it has some, I'm not going to open this because I don't want to take up too much of our time. But it looks like it might have some photocopied work in there. Exactly. And then we're going to move on to the kind of the publishing house books. This is a Martin Parr book. It was published by Aperture. But, you know, that format. Sorry that I'm peeking underneath the book. I just want to make sure you guys see it. This is another one. This is Paul Shambroom, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And this was produced by the Weizmann Art Museum. Here's another one. It has an essay in it along with photographs. Gregory Halpern, which I believe he won one of the Paris Photo Awards. This is produced by Mac Books. This is one we acquired ourselves. Then the last one is a really nice book by Shane Lavalette, and I hope I'm not messing his name up too badly.
You got it.
It has this nice, hard case that came in. I think we had a print in this that ended up going into the collection. Yeah, here's the print. So we'll put that right there. Nicely done. Those are the books that I have here, and then I just wanted us to start talking about, all the different formats, how you kind of move forward with producing a book. Why is a photo book important? So, I guess let's try to follow the outline and just kind of discuss what's the purpose of making a photo book as far as like a photographer. Like, what's the importance of it? Is it a kind of a standalone process or product, or do you kind of intertwine all the different approaches to kind of producing your work? So whoever wants to jump in and kind of talk about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, the first time I saw a zine, I was 12, and at a punk show in Louisville, Kentucky. So when I first was exposed to do-it-yourself publishing and underground books, zines were used as a way to spread information. And when I got into graduate school at Texas Women's University, one of the things that I was often challenged by with being a fine artist was this large barrier that seemed a lot based on like finances. And it seemed to me, which was frustrating as a graduate student, that the only way I could really get exposure of my work in physical form was through printing and framing my work and exhibiting in galleries and at institutions, which obviously is not a bad thing at all. But for me, at the time of being a graduate student, it was something that came with a really great financial burden. And with that, I found that with showing my work that way and it being the only way that my work was physically accessible to someone, I had to be a lot more selective in the work I was putting out there because of the incredible financial cost for printing and framing work and then shipping it to a gallery on top of even paying for submission fees. And so for me, I actually, when I got into making photo books, it started off as a way for me to easily make my work accessible while it was still friendly to my wallet. One of the other things I struggled with a lot, as a graduate student and an undergraduate student, was even when I did invest the money to put my work out into the world, it was even a bigger investment for consumers or viewers to purchase that work. And for me, art has never really been about making money. I think if you're trying to get into an industry where making money is your main goal, art's probably not the way to do it. And a lot of the work I make has always been about like family and community and relationships. And part of having that dialogue is having work that's accessible. So that's kind of how I got into making books. That's also how I started getting into collecting. So I think one of the most valuable, and Nathan talked about this a little bit, but one of the most valuable aspects about, for me, like making zines specifically and affordable art is that you're breaking that barrier that art is only available to a certain economic class of people. So it kind of takes away, I think, this sort of, I don't know, maybe it's not that art can't be valued in a prestigious institution or a gallery setting, but that setting can sometimes be very limiting. And I think photo books and zines specifically, it kind of breaks that barrier. And with breaking the barrier of how accessible art is, that can also help kind of eliminate this preconceived notion that art is only for one group of people.
Mm-hmm. So it's the idea that for you, for photo books, is it makes it more accessible to a broader audience.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
Because I understand I think David and I both understand how museums can become a little too they can kind of keep people out on some level because it's supposed to be this kind of, elegant, whatever,
Yeah.
museum building. But yeah, photo books and books generally are just much more, accessible to people. And and then you had the variety of books too. You had from the zines to, more of these, higher end books. So what does everybody else has to say about this as far as like using the book as a vehicle to reach a different audience?
I guess I can jump in. I love the idea that you could also go to an exhibition and love the work and know that it's out of reach in terms of owning individual prints, but that you might be able to go to the gift shop at a museum and buy the book. I mean, that level of accessibility is nice, even though, photo books, especially the kind that you might find in a museum, tends to be incredibly expensive compared to the kinds of books most people in the world are buying. So, it's not perfect, but I guess I would echo a lot of the sentiments that Rachel's sharing, because I think when I'm making work, a lot of times I'm thinking about the end product being a book, or maybe being some kind of hybrid of book and an exhibition. Not that it needs to be nailed down for sure at the beginning, but it helps a lot of times when thinking about how to approach a subject, especially if you wanted to say weave some kind of narrative into it, or at least a hint of a narrative aim or goal. I think that's helpful in the making process. But I think the fact that we still are not just still, but we are especially now as kind of a field really interested in photography books, it seems more than ever. I think it's a really good sign, because I think seeing how many people are actively pursuing kind of an artistic practice as photographers, because of the internet, just seeing that everyone is producing so much work, we all realize that there are not an infinite number of collectors that are going to just buy everyone's work. So in terms of the photographic prints, the book seems to be a much better option in some regards. And of course, if you're looking at a high-end big name publisher publishing it, and there is of course a chance that you're going to be putting a huge bill walking into it, and that's of course daunting. So it shifts the burden onto the financial burden on the photographer. But I think was it you, Rachel, that said that we don't get into this because we want to make a lot of money necessarily?
Yeah.
Right. So Nathan, can you talk a little bit about the process with Midwest Dirt also? I mean, you've had, a few different versions of this. Like, what's made, why have you gone through different kind of editions of it? Is that part of the access part, or?
Yeah. So I'll sort of go through a quick timeline of what I've published under that. So I worked with a guy named Matt Johnston, founder of the Photo Book Club, educator and photographer himself. But he and I worked on the original edition of Midwest Dirt, which was a nice, like, hand-sewn book. But that took over a year. And in the meantime, I started, that was going to be the first thing I ever published book-wise. And that took over a year. So I ended up publishing a few zines in the meantime, which also included work from Midwest Dirt. And since that's an ongoing project, the work changes a lot as time goes on. And I'll publish more books under the same name with a completely different edit, another sequence, all of that redesigned and everything. So at this point I've put out 3 versions of the book, 2 with different edits and 1 bootleg edition, and then maybe a few dozen zines with the same work in it. Because it's ever evolving, I feel like I can put out new publications all the time.
So how do you distribute the books you publish?
Yeah. So I sell through an online store. I visit a lot of book fairs, zine fests, and things like that, and table at them. Actually sit at a table all day and try to sell my work in person, which isn't always the easiest thing for me to do, socializing in that way for 9 hours at a time. But pardon me. Yeah. So yeah, those ways. Sold it in a few bookstores as well. So Dashwood Books, a few others. Dashwood in New York, they have carrying my book currently.
Would you say that social media helps a lot in getting books sold as well?
Yeah, exactly. The ones that I sell through my online stores, that's, yeah.
Which
Gotta get
platform do you use the most? Do you think, like, in terms of like the platform that helps you sell the most books, which one is it?
It was Tumblr when I started, but that's sort of faded.
Yeah.
So definitely Instagram and Facebook now. And it's probably even on what the best way to do it as far as finding buyers go.
You know, there's a traditional sort of old photo book market or handmade book market. The sort of greatest old bookstore in New York is Printed Matter. You probably know about Printed Matter, which is in Chelsea. I think it's on 11th Street or something like that, which was founded actually by Saul LeWitt and Lucy Lippard. And that's a really amazing place to visit. If you haven't been there online, it's interesting, but if you go there, it's really inspiring, and you can see what a lot of people are doing and how they're producing things relatively inexpensively, but really fabulous things. And you can sort of tap into a huge collector's market that's international, actually. So it's old school like me, but it's a good thing to look into if you Printed Matter.
I was lucky to visit Printed Matter this past May, actually. It's an incredible place.
Well done.
Yeah. I've never actually stepped foot in there, but I purchased books from there through the online store.
Man, you gotta have a pilgrimage.
It's time to make the trip.
Yeah.
So one other thing I want to talk about is as far as like the quality or the different, kind of, ways of printing books is what would keep someone from printing a book that's more of a zine? Like what's, there's a desire, I think, to have a high quality printed photo book, maybe from a publishing company. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it yourself. What are the different audiences when it comes to like a zine versus a custom photo book? Anybody talk about that?
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're trying to do with it. It depends on, I know, like from my experience, kind of being more, in academia, I know, and especially this was something I was around a lot before I was even in the position I was in now, is that a lot of people seek out having a book published because, in terms of like your career, I mean, having a book published is a huge, that's a huge milestone in your career. And so from, my perspective in being in academia, and also I'm a relatively new faculty member in a tenure track position. So right now I'm kind of navigating how to get tenure. And so every year I'm evaluated on my teaching, service, and then research. And so depending on what you're looking for in a book would kind of dictate why you might choose going through a big publisher or self-publishing with zines. And so one of the challenges I've definitely had is thinking about, with the zine format, while it is popular, it's definitely still something I feel like needs a little bit more justification in academia. So like if I'm self-publishing work as a zine, I know for me, in my experience, I've had to explain a lot more what a zine is and how it's relevant. Whereas if you're published through a larger publisher and you have a more traditional book format, that's something that's a little bit more easily understood. I think that it also depends on the sort of financial investment you want to make and how much risk you want. I know for me, the zine format appeals to me a lot, and just also just like lower grade photo book making, because there's not as much of a financial risk on my end. There's also not as much of a financial risk on the end of my viewers and the audience and people who purchase that book. It really just depends on, I think, what you're trying to get out of it. I think that I think in a sense, like, I mean, we live in an era where we are oversaturated with imagery, and there are a lot of photo books. And for me personally, some of the books that I have that maybe cost me $15 and maybe cost that artist a few $100s to print, there are some of those books for me that were maybe lower grade that are way more valuable to me than other books that maybe cost $30,000 to print. So it depends. I mean, it depends a lot on where you are, I think, in your career, what a photo book means to you, what you're trying to get out of it, what kind of investment you want to make. I don't think that bigger or higher quality necessarily means a better book. I've seen some really great $5 books, and I've seen some gorgeous $100 books. But I do think that with big publishers and large investments that directly, for the most part, impact the photographer, I do think there's a little bit of an oversaturation. However, what I like about zine making is that, of course, there's also an oversaturation of zines, but it's not as much of a financial burden to both parties.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, so I'm also on the tenure track, and I mean, just has to do with research in general when you're in a teaching position like this. But essentially, I've been told, kind of in a roundabout way, that self-publishing a book or you know, that kind of thing, or a zine or something like that, it's not going to hold the same weight. And part of it is just that, you know, having a publisher express interest and kind of having faith in the work is, you know, that makes a huge difference in terms of it counting as relevant research or relevant to your research of your career. And what it's caused me to think is that I guess I wish before I ended up in this tenure track position about 4 years ago that I had self-published a book. I mean, whether it was, you know, something through Kickstarter where I got a lot of money together and you know, made something really just beautiful and really high quality, or even went through a publisher that wanted to you know, me to contribute a lot of money, right? You know, maybe I approached them. I mean, I think that kind of thing would have been beneficial in terms of seeking publishers now to there's a case to be made. You know, here's the product of the first you know, body of work that I published, and so it gives them might give them a certain expectation of what's possible with the next. And now I feel like I could do that, but it wouldn't necessarily have any kind of impact on my you know, case for tenure.
Right. So
struggling with
in some ways, the publishing companies are kind of like gatekeepers to, you know, or like, you know, when you're doing publishing a paper in academia and there's peer reviewed, you know, it's almost like a peer review process for those of you that are instructors to kind of show to your, you know, administrators, you know, this is what has happened. I didn't make this on my own. Someone selected it and printed it and put it out there. Is that kind of where you're getting at with the whole idea of like trying to get tenure and then trying to find something that?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a research component to the job, yeah. I mean, this is a research university that I'm teaching at, so there's a huge emphasis on that. And I imagine that if I was at a school that maybe focused or put a larger emphasis on teaching than research, or even just really push research way down, then it might not matter one way or the other. I mean, it might, but it's because this particular type of job seems so focused on that. And it's not a problem. I'm not complaining about that. I'm happy to do it because I love the research. I love the work. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a different kind of pressure that's put on it.
I also think it doesn't necessarily have to apply just to instructors or people that are only in a position of teaching. I know for me as a grad student, um, I had this mentality as a graduate student that I would never get a job unless I had work that was published in a book form. Um, However incorrect or correct that is, that was definitely a widespread mentality that wasn't only shared by myself, but also by many of my peers. How that mentality or idea was spread, I'm not really sure of the origin of it. I think also too, even if you're not even looking for a career path in academia, a book signifies, I mean, regardless of what your career is, it signifies this milestone in your work. And so I think that there can often be this conception or this idea that you have not made it, I guess, until your work is presented in book form.
Yeah, of course, that's just, you know, one other thing that's like not actually true, because everything seems like this milestone until you achieve it, and then you're like, wait, so now what do I need to focus on? Because there's definitely something else. Like that's not going to last for long.
Yeah.
It's a nice 5-minute high, I think, and then
Yeah.
you're on to the next thing.
So going back to the idea of distribution and getting these things put out there into the world, like what do you guys find is most effective? You know, for those of you that haven't published books, like where have you seen the books? You know, we talked about one place in particular, but you know, how have you guys kind of connected with publishing and getting the books into people's hands? I mean, I'm talking specifically about the fairs, bookstores, you know, online, things like that. Like how do you promote yourself, I guess, with a book?
I think this is advice I give to students too. I think the best way to promote yourself is to promote others. You need to be active in that community. You can't be a passive participant in this community and then expect to like push your work without giving back. So I really do think, and that's one of the best things about, I think, being an artist and being a publisher or a self-publisher is that you're a part of a really valuable community. And so I think the best way to like get involved in that and to actually be successful in terms of marketing yourself is to pay attention to what other people are doing and to actively support them as well.
What are your thoughts on that, Nathan?
Yeah, going to book fairs is one of the most important things to me. Being able to meet publishers and artists. Yeah, there are a ton of people that I wouldn't know if I hadn't like actually shown up in person to try to sell my work or buy some work. I've met amazing artists and publishers that I sometimes friends with now. And yeah, that's the best way to find interesting things if you're looking to buy books. I go in expecting to buy certain books that I've heard about and then always find something completely new and interesting. And then, actually being able to be there behind the table and explain my work to people, actually put it in their hands directly. That's a invaluable experience for me and them. I think they get to meet and the artist who actually made the work, and I get to actually be there to.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, you know, when I went to the SPE conference, Midwest conference last year, you know, I met Walker, you know, made a personal connection with him, and then by extension, you know, met Nathan, which connected me to Rachel. You know, it just grows, and you really got to get involved. You can't just, like Rachel said, kind of sit on the sideline and just wait for it to happen. You kind of have to put yourself out there. We just, you know, announced that we have 2 artist residents, met both of them at SPE Midwest. So I think that's really important to get out there in some way, and hopefully this will be one way for people to get out there and make a personal connection. You know, it's not if if you're some big name photographer that's selling thousands of books, it's that took them time. It didn't happen overnight, and most of the photographers I know, most of the artists I meet, they want to make that personal connection also. So I think that's really really worth stressing, is that you need to get out there and get some face time with people and get them to know you, because then they could, on some level, they're going to understand your work more.
Yeah, I actually have to be pretty careful when I go to SB, especially at the national conference, or if I can attend a book fair, which actually has not happened a whole lot, because I am such a sucker for a good book. They're so heavy to ship or to take back in your bag, and I try to pack light, but I inevitably, when I spend a few too many minutes in any kind of exhibit like that, I walk away with a few books. They're always the biggest ones, or the heaviest. And this is why going to Printed Matter or any of these bookstores that are going to have stuff that you're just going to kind of happen across only because you're looking for something else. They're great, and then they're financially dangerous as a collector of photo books. And of course, my wife is the one I have to answer to when I've actually taken this, texting her and checking to make sure it's okay, because these are not small purchases when you get a few at a time. And I say that half jokingly. It's like, actually, I have to be careful.
Yeah, some of these stuff come cheap. Go ahead, David.
Sorry. I was going to ask if anyone has experimented with digital versions of the photo books they've produced, or do you feel that it's really important to have a physical object?
I haven't experimented with it necessarily, in that I guess I haven't thought of a really good a good format that would be so different from, viewing something on a website. Like, could I craft an experience with a digital format that didn't that was much better, say, than just something I could do online. So I haven't done that, but it's not to say
No,
done.
but I can do it.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed personally looking at productions that have been done by the National Film Board for Canada as an alternate way of thinking about books as a digital object instead of as an actual physical object. They do a lot of works that are progressive in a very similar way that books are, that where there are things on a page that you can engage with and read and listen to before you move on to the next page in the story. So when people talk about, well, like, it's a book, you can't make it digital, I've definitely seen some really successful versions of things that could have been books done digitally by the NFB.
I think I don't know so much about digital versions of books, but I do think that there is something very precious about a photograph on paper and being able to hold it and see it. And even though everything we're doing now is definitely, like, there's an increase in everything being digital and on a screen, I think because we are so used to looking at things on a screen, that there's still, should be a value in appreciating something as a tangible object. I know for me, like, my like personal reason for enjoying books is I like being able to, like, look at something and being a tangible object. And what I love about a book is that I can take it home with me, and I can live with it and be around it and have this intimate experience with it. Whereas with a screen, there's a barrier, or if I go to a gallery, it's a little bit more limited and it's a public space, and I might not be able to spend as much time with it. So for me, that's part of where I see the value in looking at work in a book format.
I agree with that, but in my own curatorial work, a lot of times I find things online or images that make me give me access to the objects themselves. So if you're trying to sort of publish a book or trying to find an audience or even trying to find a publisher, it might be a good sort of way to link those two things together.
Yeah, I guess the definition of what a book is part of the challenge. I mean, because I guess it's just difficult for me to think of something like that, like this description of you know, someone integrating sound or video. I mean, like I am working a lot more with the moving image and or even, you know, potentially sound installation, and those are, or just sound, you know, that might be experienced through someone's personal device, and those are like, that's really exciting. And I think, you know, there are different ways of delivering that type of content as well. So it could be in a museum, but it could also be modified to be on, like, I'd say, a handheld device. So that's really exciting. But I guess part of it too is just thinking, why call it a book if you're going to integrate, like when you integrate video into something like that, it's not a negative thing necessarily, but what's the point of saying it's a book necessarily, other than some other kind of.
Right. I've seen that come up a couple of times. Publication versus book. You know, I could easily see something digital being called more of a publication. I think we do publish online, so I think there's a distinction there. I think books are more physical in my mind. When people talk about books, I think more physical.
Well, I also think that books, that there's like, well, there is this kind of paradigm of there's a linear quality to them. You know, you're supposed to go a certain direction through them, but of course there are many bookmakers that have turned that concept on its head, and then they'll I can't remember the artist right now, but there's this book that it's kind of two books in one in a way, and they're joined, so they're two different spines. And so you open one cover and then you open the other cover, and then I think each of the pages are kind of interwoven like this. So you open one page, then you have to open the next one, but so it leads you down a path in that way. But then there's another book I found that was very similar, but the pages don't connect in that way, so they're separate. So you can just make whatever pairings you want, and there's no necessarily exact set of pairs throughout the book. So that's more of a kind of an experience, and that's why it's, for me, even that's kind of hard to. That's why the idea of like a multimedia presentation, calling it a presentation versus a book or something else, is like, those definitions are strange and limiting sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that also. I mean, I think there's this idea of, you know, the art, you know, something you produce as being a final art piece or product. And then there's this idea of publishing and bookmaking and things like that. There seems to be some little bit of a separation between those things and how you talk about them or describe them. If anybody has any other thoughts, please share them. But I'm going to open this up to questions from our audience. See if we get any.
We do have an audience question from Facebook.
Okay.
Carrie was wondering if someone could ask Nathan if he's familiar with Roger May's series / book Looking at Appalachia. Carrie said they draw parallels with the Midwest Dirt series.
Yeah, I know about Roger's work, and he made a book recently, and I unfortunately waited too long, and it was sold out. I mean, maybe that was a few years ago now, but anyway, I'm familiar with his work, and I do think there's a connection. The way he thinks about, he and others that he works with anyway, think about the land there and how it's represented. There is a connection there. So definitely had specific thoughts about the way that Midwest Dirt would represent the Midwest, which is my home. yeah, there's rural America is not always represented in the best way, the most positive way. So there's
If all of you guys could talk about the idea of Midwest photography, if there's a Midwest kind of, thing. I know there's, the South, I think each region seems to have some loose idea of what it is, but do you think there's something with the Midwest that has a connection to photography that's kind of makes it its own, or?
I know in my experience, it's interesting. Where I'm from is there's kind of like an identity crisis. Like, is Kentucky, how Southern or how Midwestern is Kentucky? And being from Louisville, Kentucky specifically, it's not exactly my perception. It doesn't really have like the most Southern identity. They kind of cherry pick between South and Midwest. However, though, I think there's something about that idea and living in a place that actually has an identity crisis that really contributes to what I'm interested in and like the work that like I'm making and the work that I look at. For me, when I think about the Midwest, and it's not all states in the Midwest, but I think about the idea of living in a landlocked state and how constricting that can be, or living in a place that's predominantly landlocked, and that kind of like claustrophobia. And then if you mix that in with also like this idea of like an identity crisis, I think it makes for some really interesting work. But in terms of like regional art, like Southern art versus Midwestern art, I think it depends on the person. I don't really like, I've never quite like looked at a body of work and I've thought, oh, that's definitely Midwestern. When I have recognized something as being Midwestern versus being Southern or Western, it's mostly just geography. So if I see like a landmark or like certain types of like foliage, then I might recognize, okay, this is obviously this location. But in terms of mood, I don't think I could accurately say that a certain region dictates a specific genre or type of art. But I do know that for a lot of artists that I know and people that I collect from that identify as being Midwestern artists who make work about the Midwest, I think there is definitely a sort of continuity amongst that work that is usually identified by similar like social struggles that exist in specific regions in the country.
I think the idea of the Midwest I'm not a Midwesterner. I'm from Texas, and I grew up kind of in these two different parts of Texas, in West Texas and East Texas. And East Texas is in this odd position because it feels a little, where I grew up, it felt a little more like Louisiana than Texas. And then kind of was Southern, but you talk to a Southerner and they're like, Texas isn't the South. And so I always felt like I was like, I don't know exactly what I am either, other than just Texan. But coming to the Midwest, I had, certain expectations, and those were, not positive ones necessarily, but they were wrong, of course. And then what it seems to me that the Midwest is defined by people outside of the Midwest, right? It's like, maybe it shouldn't be called the Midwest, but everybody else thinks it is. So it is. It's all lumped together. But if you just look at the region, it's massive. There's so many states, and there's just no way, just geographically speaking, there's no way that it could be uniform or even close to it. In fact, there was somebody that released a map a while back that many of you may have seen that showed the way that culturally we're actually divided in much different ways than the state boundaries would indicate. And so anyway, but I like this idea of also being defined by what you're not, or being maybe making work as resistance to something else. I would find it really difficult to say what makes, Midwest photography, or what Midwest photography might look like, or maybe even primary categories. That's really hard for me to define. And it might be that I haven't looked closely enough yet, but I just think it probably doesn't really exist unless someone has a good case otherwise.
I'd also like to have you as participants, if you guys had any questions you wanted to ask each other, or if, something curious about, what each person does. I mean, we'll open it up to those kind of questions also.
I'll ask David a question. And part of this is rooted in the fact that I have grad students, for instance, that are really interested in bookmaking. Sometimes they're just these small non-edition books, artist books or something, but they may actually be working on a book they're going to publish. And their thesis tends to be, it tends to be an exhibition. That's the format it takes. And so there's always a little bit of a struggle with integrating books, or whether they should or shouldn't. So I'm curious how the museum, or how you maybe approach the idea of a book being part of an exhibition. Or, I mean, do you like the idea of actually taking spreads from a book and putting them on the wall, or having multiple copies of a book available, or anything related to that, books and exhibition?
Well, it's difficult because the way that most institutions collect books is that the libraries are where books are kept, and even sort of fine books or limited edition books. Exhibiting them is difficult because, of course, you have to decide upon a spread, or you have to sort of, open the object to all viewers. So you have to give them a chance to sort of turn the pages. And so that's difficult, especially as things become more and more precious. As time goes by and we decide we like these books better than others, or, they become rarer or more valuable, different kinds of limitations come into the problem. So I think that nowadays, most large libraries have specialized book collections, special collections, where they collect handmade books and make them available to readers, and then exhibit them in flat cases or whatever. So in a university like ours, or in a museum like the Museum of Modern Art, for example, there are essentially two different departments, two different collections. And so it makes the whole thing kind of complicated. And of course, this is when you're putting books in the collection, and most graduate students don't have the luxury of creating things that go immediately to museum collections. So I'm not sure I'm answering any of your questions, actually.
No, that's okay. Although I'll add on to it, I'm curious if you've seen maybe other institutions that have tackled that problem, or maybe just used books in an interesting way in exhibitions.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of up to the artist. Do you want your object to be handled? Many of you do, obviously. So is it right that it should be in a museum, that it should be in a library where you have to make an appointment to see it, or you have to use gloves to see it? These are all the problems that curators have to deal with all the time.
Yeah, I have colleagues in ceramics here in Nebraska, and that we've talked about this idea of in their kind of their little culture, they're very used to just walking up and grabbing a pot and inspecting it in an exhibition. And I don't know if that transfers into the museum setting, but certainly in exhibitions here and other places, that's totally normal. And of course, all the rest of us see someone touch anything on a plinth, and we just freak out that they shouldn't be doing that, clearly. And so their culture is dictated that they can.
It's an interesting problem, isn't it? Because if you give a lot of attention to the kind of paper you're using, the kind of printing you're using, the way that you're binding the book, you want people to have a sort of a tactile experience of this thing and hold it in their hands. And that's not possible when things enter collections or public collections.
Yeah. Thanks.
Nathan, what was the last book you bought?
Let's see. haven't bought a book for a few weeks.
What was the last trade you did?
What's that?
What about trade?
I've got one in the mail with Trevor Powers, so we'll see. But
Awesome.
mine's still sitting on the desk. I'm gonna mail it when I get back. But gonna get some cool work from Trevor Powers in the mail soon.
Nice.
Along those lines, like what are the fairs coming up too that you guys are planning on attending?
Visual Studies Workshops Photo Book Works Symposium is happening this summer, I'm pretty sure. I have to double check the dates. I can post it on the Facebook event once I actually figure it out, but I'm really, really looking forward to that.
I'll be at SPE this March in Philly. As of right now, I believe that's the only thing I have planned, but it's still early in the year.
Yeah. Just registered for Chicago Zine Fest this weekend, so be there next.
Seems like you're at a different fair every weekend, Nathan.
It feels like that sometimes. I am literally some months during the summer.
I think your family life is in danger.
I did think of the last book that I purchased, if I could have a moment to share it.
Sure.
It's really cool. I'll be right back.
While I was doing that, on that note, I was actually thinking about what you're saying about family life being in danger. I was complaining earlier that, I have to call my wife or text her and say that I'm about to spend a bunch of our money. But there was a time where she went with me to Photo Nola, and Deborah Luster, who I've now, since brought here as a visiting artist, she had presented work and she was signing books, and I ended up buying, of course, going to draw a blank on the name, but this giant book of hers, the one with the circular images, if anyone's familiar, shot in New Orleans. It was $100, and it was just gorgeous. And having her there with me, my wife there with me, made the case much easier to make. I was just like, look at this thing, it's gorgeous. And she's like, you need to buy it. You should get her on. So that might be the trick. For me, at least.
Yeah. I've never not spent more money than I planned on at a book fair or similar event. Okay, so I have a book called Car Paintings from Evan Jenkins. I picked this up from the Chicago Art Book Fair. So yeah, it's just the abstract photographs of cars painted poorly. So maybe they've been in accidents, primer.
Nice.
So yeah, that appealed to my working in a body shop. I fix cars, and that's sort of the family business. And also, they're just beautifully printed, beautiful photographs with a really interesting edit and book. So just couldn't stay away from this one. It's absolutely fantastic and made in a small edition. So Car Paintings by Evan Jenkins. If you guys get a chance, it will be gone soon.
Well, we're expecting you to donate that at some point. So
Yeah, that's totally fair.
I think if anybody has any other questions, throw them out. But I think we're going to start wrapping it up. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that participated. This is our first of hopefully many webinar sessions. Yeah, I think it was pretty good, for the first time. But what's that? If anybody has any questions in the future, start wrapping it up. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that participated. This is our first of hopefully many webinar. I'm going to mute all of you. Okay, so this is our first of many. And if you want to keep track of how this goes, we're on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can go to our website. I'm hoping to get our newsletter rolling. We have had a lot of other ideas for different kinds of sessions. and if it would be great if everybody that attended and was on Facebook could send me feedback and let me know how you felt this went. I'd really appreciate that. Would really help us a lot, just making this better and kind of getting things a little more going in the right direction. But again, I'm going to unmute people. Thank you all. Feel free to contact me through Yield anytime. That wraps it up for me. Does anybody have anything else they want to say? Or
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I had a great time.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, this was really fun.
Appreciate it.
You guys.
cool. All right. Well, I'm going to sign us all out, and I'll hopefully see you guys in a couple more weeks. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.